Hello and welcome to another installment of History Hack. Alina's very, very excited today, aren't you, Alina?
When am I never excited? I'm always
Okay, why are
excited.
you more excitable than usual? Usually she's like a Labrador puppy. Today she's like a Labrador puppy on speed. Why?
Because I'm very excited, ladies and gentlemen. So, this lovely lady is one of my favourite historians, and I don't say this often, but not only is she a historian, she's an award-winning author and a broadcaster, the fabulous Clare Mulley. She has written some fantastic books like The Woman, The Woman, oh my God, I can't speak today, Who Saved the Children and The Spy Who Loved, which actually led her to being decorated with the Polish Benemerito honorary distinction, which is really awesome. You may also recognise her from various historical documentaries. So welcome, Claire.
Oh, thank you very much. Lovely to be here. Well, I'm actually obviously at home, but
Yeah,
lovely
we're
to
not breaking any laws. How is lockdown? Whereabouts are you?
I'm in Essex, Essex girl, and it's all right. Yeah, I'm lucky I've got a garden. I've got lots and lots of books, so trying to make a few inroads into that. And obviously I'm pretending that I'm a female special agent exhibiting a kind of cool and lonely courage on my own here.
Yeah, that's the only way to do it. Otherwise you'll go crazy. Otherwise we just become crazy cat / dog lady.
Let's start with one of my favourites, which is Christina Scarbeck. So can you tell us a little bit about her? And wasn't she Churchill's favourite spy?
Well, she may have been at one point in the war, yes. So Christina Scarbeck, or Christine Granville, as she's perhaps better known in the UK, but not in Poland, was the first woman to serve Britain as a special agent in the Second World War. And not only that, she was actually the longest serving agent, female or male, for Britain during that conflict, and one of the most effective as well. So, yes, I've written an old book on her. The book's called The Spy Who Loved, because Christine was a very passionate woman. She loved men. She had two husbands and many lovers, and she loved adrenaline and action. But above all, she loved freedom and independence, both for her country, Poland, and for herself personally. So she's absolutely inspirational woman. She was born a Polish countess, but she didn't want to be dancing polonaises. She wanted to get get everything she could from life. And perhaps it's ironic that war, that normally is, we presume, sidelines women. Actually, it was war that gave her the opportunity to take centre stage when she became the first woman to serve Britain as a special agent. She served in 3 different theatres of the war. She was incredibly effective, and she was very highly honoured for her achievement. She got the George Medal, the OBE, and the French gave her the Croix de Guerre with 1 star as well. And yes, in one of her early actions at the start of the war, she was serving in Poland, and she was smuggling information across borders. At times she was skiing over the high Tatra mountains in apparently temperatures of -20 degrees. Someone told me that's enough to freeze the birds on the branches of the trees, which sounds a bit too romantic for what she was going through. She was skiing past dead bodies and so on,
Wow.
frozen mountains. Yeah, and she would stop and put pine crosses on them. She's just a lovely woman. Anyhow, and she would bring back information. And one of the things she brought back, she smuggled inside her leather gloves across a couple of borders, and it was film footage taken by the Polish resistance. And what it showed was the massing of troops and tanks on what was then the German side of the German-Soviet border, and the creation of a series of fuel and ammunition dumps, clearly to support a land-based invasionary army. And this was the first film footage of German preparations for Operation Barbarossa, the Nazi German invasion of their erstwhile ally, the Soviet Union. And she got that to the British air attaché in Sofia. He got it sent directly on to Churchill. And Churchill was astounded. I mean, he obviously checked the information on this through his ultra sources, that's Bletchley Park and so on, and it all stacked up. So he did get in touch with Stalin on the basis of this to warn him of what was imminent. Stalin sadly didn't believe him. Anyhow, and Churchill's daughter, Sarah Oliver, who was a big fan of Christine, she was an actress and actually wanted to play her in a biopic of Christine in the 1950s. But she later said that she wanted to play that role because her father, Winston Churchill, had told her that at that point, Christine was his favourite spy.
That's brilliant. What about women in general in the SOE? Can you give us an overall picture of what it was like for them and why they were needed?
Yes, of course. Well, Christine actually, she signed up not with SOE because it hadn't even been created. She was so quick off the mark. She was in the field before the end of 1939, working for something called Section D. That D was for destruction. It was about sabotage in those days. But that later got merged with two other organisations and became SOE in sort of the summer of 1940. And SOE is a Special Operations Executive. It was a British organisation which was designed to support the domestic resistance in occupied nations or resisting nations through the coordination of sabotage and preparations for the Allied Liberationary Forces when they would eventually come in. And they supplied communications, which was absolutely vital, so wireless sets. They supplied training and armaments, of course, and many other supplies. So women were sent down in this role. Men and women actually often did the same roles, but women were recruited specifically for two roles to work in these very small cellular networks. They're actually based originally on the IRA idea of having cells so that if one is broken, they won't know the names of people in other cells. So it's a security sort of structure. And each of these cells would have three main roles. There'd be a circuit leader, which was always a man. Men were recruited for that role. And then there was a courier and a wireless transmitter operator. And the women were sent in for the last two roles. But actually, once they were in the field, people were getting arrested or executed or just shot. And a number of the women, of course, stood up for whatever was required. And several of them, like Pearl Witherington, for example, led armies, male armies, into battle. And they undertook all the coordinating roles. They did all the same work that the men did as well. So they served across a number of different countries, but most were sent into France. 39 women were sent into France, and they were actually given a life expectancy. They were told before they went out, because all the women, of course, are volunteers, not conscripts. So they were warned and given the option to pull out, because they believed that they had about a 6 weeks life expectancy, especially for wireless transmitters, because the Germans could, they had signal detection vans, and they could pin them onto that wireless signal and get closer and closer, and so eventually capture the agent. So they could expect to be caught, interrogated, probably quite brutally, and probably shot within 6 weeks. Despite knowing that, Christine volunteered for 3 different theatres of the war to serve. And of those 39 women who volunteered for France alone, 13 of them never returned. So, yeah, it was incredibly terrifying.
These women are inspirational.
They really
are.
are.
Absolutely inspirational. And that's one of the things that annoys me, because, I mean, even recently in books I've seen since my book came out and some films and so on, the popular imagination still tends to see female special agents or women in the resistance more generally in very romantic terms. They tend to be they're doing it because their brother's been shot, they didn't really want to. Perhaps some of them have got some spirit, but they're often celebrated as much for their beauty and certainly for their courage, which we mustn't underestimate, rather than for their achievements. And I think one of the fabulous things about Christina's story, and many of these women, is actually how much they achieved, and that story still hasn't really been fully told.
I agree. Could you tell us what their recruitment was actually like?
Yes, so no women would go in and apply for this work. So it tended to be, recruitment was done through the Fannies and the WAFs, the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry or whatever, these different groups, the ATS. So people would apply for that, and then it was discovered they had very good language skills, for example. Perhaps they'd lived in France before the war, from an Anglo-French family, or, one of the other things to say is that, of course, it's not just French. They had many women from many different nations. And that's one of the fantastic things about these women who served. They were such a diverse group. And people often say to me, were the recruiters looking for specific things? I think they were. They were looking for knowledge of the country into which they would be sent back to serve. They were looking for language skills, of course. They were looking for courage and physical fitness, although these women were all different age ranges. I mean, there were grandmothers. There was one woman who had a prosthetic leg, Virginia Hall from America. But they were, essentially, it was the diversity that gave them such an important role. The one thing that women had, what they were recruited for, it wasn't the superpower that's so often ascribed to them of being very glamorous and sexy and seducing people. Not that at all. What they had was the superpower of being generally overlooked because they're women. And so especially after in France in 1942, this policy came through called the STO, the Service Travail Obligataire. So that was when they recruited any able-bodied Frenchmen who weren't already prisoners of war, dead, or fighting overseas. They recruited them for the German war effort to go and be forced labourers in the factories producing arms and so on. And so lots of the young men then disappeared up into the hills to become resistance fighters. And any able-bodied man moving around the country, as resistance fighters had to do, to collect guns and ammunition, take information, whatever it was immediately suspect. But women were moving around France all the time, trying to keep businesses going, trying to support families and so on. And women tended to be overlooked. At first, the Germans thought that, a